When my 5-year-old pointed at a stranger in a $1,000 suit and called him Dad, the world around me didn't just stop. It fractured. For one horrifying heartbeat, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even remember how to blink, because the man my son had just claimed as his father was the same man I had promised myself I would never see again. The same man whose hands had once set fire to my skin, and whose voice still haunted my dreams in the dead of night. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of bright, glittering afternoon New York only offers when it wants to mock you. The charity gala was meant to be a small act of kindness, a community fundraiser for children's literacy, nothing more. I was there because Mrs. Anders, my cafe's most loyal customer, had begged me to bring Eli along, claiming everyone loved a cute kid with dimples. I told her I wasn't made for events with crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains, that people like me, women who built lives out of ash and fear, didn't belong in rooms filled with silk and diamonds. But she insisted, and I caved, because saying no to kindness had always been harder for me than surviving cruelty. Eli was wearing the little navy suit I'd found at a thrift store, the one he said made him look like a gentleman. He was proud of his shiny shoes and the red bow tie that hung a little crooked on his neck. His laughter was my music, his hand small and warm inside mine as we walked into that ballroom where the lights shimmered like stars on water. I didn't see him at first. I only heard the low murmur shift, voices dipping, attention turning, and when I followed the invisible current of gazes, I saw him. Sion J, the devil I once mistook for salvation. He stood at the far end of the room, tall and impossibly composed, wearing a black suit tailored so sharply it could have cut through glass. His face was colder than I remembered, the kind of beauty that doesn't invite warmth but demands submission. The crowd seemed to orbit around him without meaning to, like their instincts recognized power long before their minds did. There was an aura about him, lethal grace wrapped in calm. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make the room tremble. I froze. 5 years had passed since that night in Seoul, the night I should have forgotten, but never could. 5 years since I'd run, hiding a secret beneath my ribs and a baby in my belly. I had built my life far from the shadows of men like him, building a tiny cafe with my own hands, learning to smile again, teaching myself how to sleep without fear. And yet here he was, my sin, my secret, my past, looking untouched by time, looking like every mistake I ever made had only sharpened him into something more dangerous. And then it happened. Eli tugged on my dress, eyes wide and bright with innocent recognition, though he had never seen the man before in his life. He pointed, that small, chubby, finger trembling slightly as if guided by something far beyond his understanding, and said in that sweet, ringing voice that made strangers smile and my heart ache, "Mommy, look! That man looks like me. Is he my dad?" I think the glass I was holding slipped from my hand before the words even reached my brain. The shatter echoed louder than the music. Heads turned. My throat closed around 1,000 unspoken things. I wanted to scream, to grab my son and run, but my body betrayed me, frozen by a kind of terror that didn't come from danger, but from destiny. Because Sion J heard. He turned, slowly, like a predator following the sound of prey. And when his eyes found me, I felt the air rush out of the room. Those eyes, dark, unreadable, and so achingly familiar, scanned me from head to toe, then dropped to the boy at my side. For a moment, the mask slipped, just barely. I saw something flicker behind that cold composure, a glint of recognition, confusion, then realization. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the impassive calm of a man who has seen too much to ever be surprised again. But I saw it. God help me, I saw it. He walked toward us. I wanted to move, to hide, to do anything but stand there like a woman chained to her own mistakes, but my legs refused to obey. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, predatory. The crowd parted for him without a word. His gaze never left mine. When he stopped in front of us, he didn't say my name right away. He just looked down at Eli, who stared up at him with wide, curious eyes, a mirror image of the man standing before him. Same black hair, same sharp brows, same quiet, intense gaze. It was like looking at past and future colliding in the same breath. "Claudia," he said finally, his voice as smooth and dangerous as I remembered, carrying that low soul accent that curled around every syllable like smoke. "It's been a long time." I swallowed hard, my voice trapped somewhere between fear and fury. "You shouldn't be here." He smiled, not with warmth, but with the kind of amusement that said he knew exactly how much power he still had over me. "You live in my city now," he said quietly. "It seems I am exactly where I should be." Before I could answer, Eli took a small step forward, his innocent curiosity cutting through the thick air like a blade. "Are you really my dad?" he asked, tilting his head the way he always did when trying to understand the world. Something in Sion J's expression changed. The amusement vanished. His eyes softened, barely but unmistakably. He crouched down, so he was eye level with the boy, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw the man I met that night. Not the Mafia heir, not the monster I feared, but the man who had held me like I was something breakable and precious, who had kissed me as if he'd been starving his whole life. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his tone gentle in a way that made my chest ache. "Eli," my son replied proudly. "Eli Blackwell." "Blackwell," Sion J repeated, tasting the name like a secret. His gaze flicked up to mine again, sharp and knowing. "I see." He stood slowly, towering over me again, his presence suffocating but magnetic, like a storm I couldn't look away from. "We should talk," he said, calm as ever, as if he hadn't just torn my world open with a few words. "I have nothing to say to you," I whispered, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. He leaned in slightly, so close I could smell the faint trace of expensive cologne and danger. "Then you'll listen," he murmured, "because I think, Claudia, you've been keeping something from me." He glanced at Eli again before turning away, leaving a silence so heavy I could barely breathe under it. As he disappeared into the crowd, I felt my heart pound against my ribs like a caged thing trying to escape. I grabbed Eli's hand, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Come on, baby, we're leaving." But as I led him out of that glittering hall, I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I lied to myself, fate had already found me. Because Sion J didn't just see me tonight. He saw him. And when a man like Sion J sets his eyes on something that belongs to him, he never lets it go. When I got home that night, my reflection looked like a stranger's. My lipstick was smeared, not by touch but by trembling, and my hair had come undone from where I'd nervously run my fingers through it 100 times. My son was asleep in his room, clutching the stuffed rabbit I'd stitched for him years ago, unaware that the simple word "dad" had just torn open a part of my life I'd buried deep enough to believe it would never surface again. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock, each second reminding me that time never truly erases anything, it only buries the dead under new mistakes. But the past doesn't stay buried. Not when the man you tried to forget has the power to make the world remember for you. 5 years ago, I was another version of myself. Raw, reckless, and bleeding from the inside. I had been in Seoul for less than a month, escaping an ex who didn't just break my heart, but shattered every bone of my trust. I worked as a translator for a small logistics firm, spending my evenings hiding behind screens and my nights trying to forget the bruises that had faded on my skin, but not in my mind. I wasn't looking for anything. Not love, not comfort, not even distraction. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to be ready before it changes everything. The night I met Sion J, the rain was heavy enough to blur the city lights into watercolor streaks. I ducked into a bar near the harbor. A quiet place with too much whiskey and not enough laughter. The kind of place where people came to disappear. He was there, alone, sitting in the corner booth like he owned the silence around him. And maybe he did, because even the rain outside seemed to hush for him. I noticed him first because everyone else seemed to avoid looking at him, and that kind of fear has always drawn my curiosity. He had that rare stillness, the kind that comes from control so absolute it borders on violence. He wasn't drunk, wasn't loud, wasn't the kind of man who needed to make his presence known. He simply was, and that was enough to make the air bend around him. When our eyes met, I felt something deep inside me stutter. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense. It was recognition, as if my soul whispered a warning I chose to ignore. He looked at me the way a storm studies the coastline before it destroys it. Curious, inevitable, and patient. He didn't approach me right away. He let me drink in uneasy peace, but every few minutes I'd feel that gaze again, like invisible fingertips tracing the back of my neck. When he finally moved toward me, I remember the faint click of his shoes against the floor, the way people subtly shifted out of his path. "Do you always drink alone?" he asked, his voice smooth, accented, and threaded with a kind of quiet authority that made it impossible not to look up. "I do most things alone," I'd said, trying to sound unaffected. He smiled, not kindly but knowingly, the kind of smile that says you can't fool me. "That sounds lonely," he murmured, sitting across from me without asking. "I prefer lonely to dangerous." He laughed then, a soft, unexpected sound that almost sounded human. "You think I'm dangerous? I think you like it that I do." He didn't deny it. Instead, he poured me another drink and asked for my name. I lied. He didn't correct me. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything, about the city and how it pretends to be alive when it's really just bleeding neon light. He listened when I spoke. Really listened, and for someone like me, who'd been silenced for years, that felt like the beginning of something I didn't want but needed. When he touched my hand, it wasn't accidental. His skin was warm, his grip firm, his eyes dark enough to drown in. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. That night I followed him out into the rain, into a black car that smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, into a penthouse high above the Han River, where the world was nothing but shadows and heartbeat. He kissed me like he wanted to consume the past from my skin. His touch was fire, deliberate and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world to memorize the shape of my surrender. There was no tenderness in it, not really. It was hunger and ache and something deeper, something that felt like recognition. It was the first time I'd felt seen and the last time I'd ever feel safe. I didn't ask who he was, but I knew. The way the guards outside bowed, the way people spoke his name like a secret. Sion J wasn't a man, he was a storm, wearing a suit. I should have run, but I stayed, because after years of being broken by a man who loved cruelty, I wanted to know what it felt like to be destroyed by someone who loved power. When dawn came, the city was still wet from the night's rain, and I slipped out of his bed before the light could touch my face. I left a note that said, "Thank you for the silence." I thought that would be the end of it. But fate, cruel as ever, had other plans. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I tried to reach him once, just once. The number he gave me was dead, the address I remembered no longer existed. And when I saw a headline a week later about a gang massacre tied to the Han family's heir, I convinced myself he was either dead or unreachable, and that was how it needed to be. I left Korea before my belly began to show, and promised myself I would never tell my son who his father was. Not because I hated him, but because I feared the world he came from. And now, 5 years later, that same world had found us. I thought about all of this as I sat in the dark, the city humming quietly outside my window. the glow of a distant neon sign flickering across the walls. My hands trembled when I picked up my phone, half expecting to see an unknown number or a message that would start with my name. But there was nothing. Just silence. For 2 days, I didn't see him. I told myself maybe it was over. Maybe I had imagined the weight of that gaze. Maybe Sion J had seen my son and decided to walk away. But deep down, I knew better. Men like him don't walk away. They wait. On the third night, after closing the cafe, I stepped outside to find a black car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, the engine off. But I knew. I knew the way the air felt heavier, the way my skin prickled. I stood there for a moment, keys clenched in my hand like a weapon I couldn't use, and then the door opened. He stepped out. Same dark suit. Same impossible calm. The streetlight painted him in gold and shadow, like he didn't quite belong to either. "You disappeared well," he said, voice low and unhurried, but not well enough. I couldn't speak. I could only stare as he took a slow step closer, the faintest hint of something unreadable in his expression. "You owe me the truth," he said, his eyes flicking toward the upstairs window where my son's light still glowed faintly through the curtains. "And I'm done being polite." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside there was a photo, Eli at the park, smiling, unaware someone had taken his picture. My stomach twisted into ice. "Next time," he murmured, his voice almost tender, "I won't ask." Then he turned, his silhouette vanishing into the night like smoke, leaving behind nothing but the echo of my heartbeat and the cold certainty that my carefully built world was about to burn. The week after Sion J's return felt like standing at the edge of a storm, knowing it's going to break but not knowing when. Watching the horizon darken until the waiting itself becomes a kind of torture. I told myself I could ignore him, that if I kept my head down and moved through the days like nothing had happened, he would lose interest, he would get bored, he would vanish back into whatever violent empire he ruled. But men like Sion J don't vanish. They move like shadows. Quietly. Patiently. Until you forget they're there. And that's when they strike. I kept working at the cafe, pretending to smile at customers, pretending not to flinch every time the door chimed open, pretending my hands didn't tremble when I counted the register at night. My son, blissfully unaware of the hurricane gathering around us, continued to draw dragons on napkins and ask questions about planets and superheroes, his voice the only light left in the darkness I was slipping back into. But no matter how tightly I clung to the illusion of normal, fear has a way of seeping through cracks, and soon it began to show. It was a Thursday when everything fell apart. The morning started quietly. Too quietly. Eli had woken up pale, his energy dimmed, his little face flushed with a fever that refused to break. I told myself it was a cold, maybe the flu. But when his breathing turned shallow, when his small body went limp in my arms, panic clawed through my chest. I rushed him to the hospital, every red light an eternity, every second a prayer. They took him from me as soon as we arrived. Machines beeped, voices overlapped, nurses moved like ghosts in white. I stood in the hallway, helpless, the walls closing in. I had faced monsters, but nothing terrified me more than the sight of my child lying small and silent on that hospital bed. The doctor came out eventually, his expression professional but hesitant, the kind of face that always precedes bad news. "Your son's blood work shows a rare immune deficiency," he explained, words heavy and clinical, like he'd rehearsed them 100 times. "We need a genetic match for a specific type of transfusion. It's hereditary. Do you have contact with the father?" The question sliced through me like glass. "No," I said automatically, my voice sharp, defensive, trembling. "He's not in the picture." The doctor's gaze softened with pity, and I hated that look more than anything. If there's any way to reach him, it could help your son recover faster. His DNA might be essential. DNA. The word felt like a curse. I nodded numbly, thanked him, walked to the hospital bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection until my vision blurred. My son's life depended on the one man I swore I'd never let near him. I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving before my mind caught up. I didn't have his number, but I didn't need it. When Sion J wants to be found, he leaves breadcrumbs. And when he doesn't want to be found, he leaves warnings. That photo he'd given me, Eli in the park, had a phone number written faintly in pencil on the back. I had seen it before, ignored it, refused to acknowledge what it meant. But now, trembling in that hospital bathroom, I dialed it. He answered on the first ring. "Claudia," he said, voice low and calm, as if he had expected this call all along. My throat burned. "It's Eli," I managed. "He's sick. The doctors need the father's DNA." A pause, a deep, measured breath. Then, "Where are you?" "The Children's Hospital on 54th Street. I'm on my way." The line went dead before I could say another word. He arrived in less than 30 minutes, though it felt like hours. When I saw him step into the sterile white corridor, something inside me twisted in conflicting directions. Relief, dread, guilt, need, all tangled together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He looked out of place in that setting of sickness and fear. His dark suit immaculate. His expression carved from calm authority. Nurses glanced at him, then away, as if their instincts recognized the kind of man he was. Without a word, he approached me, his gaze flicking to the door where Eli lay inside. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they asked for you," I whispered, the words tasting like betrayal. He didn't hesitate. "Then let's not waste time." He turned to the nurse's station, his tone polite but commanding, his Korean accent softening the edges of his English. "You need blood and DNA testing. I'll provide it. Now." They didn't question him. People rarely do when power wears a human face. When they led him away for the tests, I sat outside the examination room, my hands shaking, my heart pounding with 1,000 unsaid things. I hated that he could walk in and take control so easily, that he could turn my chaos into order with a few words. I hated that part of me was grateful. Hours passed before the doctor returned, holding a clipboard and a look that told me the truth had finally caught up. "The results came back," he said gently. "The genetic markers are a perfect match. There's no doubt. He's the father." I closed my eyes, the air leaving my lungs in one long, painful sigh. The truth I'd hidden for 5 years was now written in medical ink, undeniable and permanent. When Sion J came back, his sleeves rolled up, a faint mark on his arm from the blood draw. He didn't ask for confirmation. He didn't need to. His eyes told me he already knew. He walked past me into Eli's room, standing beside the bed where our son lay sleeping. The sight of him there, this man of violence and silence, watching over the child we created, was something I couldn't bear and couldn't look away from. He brushed a hand over Eli's hair, his touch almost reverent, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "He has my eyes," he said quietly. I swallowed, hard, unable to find words. He turned to me then, expression unreadable but dangerous in its calm. "You should have told me." "I couldn't," I said, my voice breaking. "Your world would have swallowed him whole." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "You think hiding him kept him safe? Look around you, Claudia. The universe doesn't care about your fear. He's mine, and now that I know, there's no going back." Something in his tone, soft but absolute, made my stomach twist. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had no right, that he had forfeited every claim the moment I left, but deep down, I knew it wasn't true. Blood ties are invisible chains, and I had just wrapped one around both of us. That night, after Eli stabilized, Sion J insisted on driving us home. I tried to refuse, but he didn't ask for permission. He stood outside the hospital doors, the city lights glinting off his black car, waiting like a promise I didn't want to keep. The drive was silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I could feel his gaze occasionally flick toward me, studying the woman I had become, the woman who'd escaped him. When we reached my building, he parked without turning off the engine. "I'll have my men watching the place," he said simply, "until we're sure no one's using him against me." My pulse quickened. "Against you?" He turned to me, eyes cold and clear. "You think it's coincidence you saw me again after 5 years? Someone wanted me distracted, and now that they know about him, they'll use him to hurt me, which means you're both targets." The weight of his words pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. "I don't want your protection," I whispered. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that crawled under my skin. "You don't have a choice anymore, Claudia. You tied yourself to me the moment you called." Then he opened my door, his hand brushing mine for just a second. A brief touch that carried more power than any threat. "Rest," he said softly, almost kindly. "Tomorrow we talk." And as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, clutching the doorframe as if it could hold me up, I realized that the nightmare I thought I'd escaped 5 years ago wasn't returning. It had never left. It had just been waiting for me to open the door. It started with the black car that never left the curb outside my apartment, sleek and silent like a panther in the dark. Its windows tinted so deeply I could never see who sat inside, though I didn't need to. I already knew whose eyes were watching from behind that glass, whose orders kept the engine idling even through the cold mornings and the endless nights. It became the sound I learned to live with. That low hum of the engine that whispered, "You're not alone anymore," and though part of me wanted to believe it was protection, the wiser part of me, the part that had learned to read danger not in shouts but in silence, knew it was possession. For the first few days after the hospital, I tried to pretend life could still be ordinary, that my cafe could still smell of coffee and cinnamon, that the laughter of my customers could drown out the echo of Sionjay's voice telling me I had no choice. But reality has a way of bleeding through even the thickest walls of denial. And soon, I began to notice the changes. Small at first, like invisible threads being woven around my world, until I realized I was caught in a web of his making. The first change came when I arrived at work one morning and found a man I didn't recognize installing a new security camera above the cafe door. He wore a black suit, the kind too formal for manual work, and when I asked who sent him, he didn't answer. He only handed me a small card embossed with a gold emblem I remembered from years ago, the crest of the Han family. Beneath it, 2 words printed in fine lettering, "For your safety." I tore the card in half and threw it away, but the camera stayed. Then came the deliveries, boxes of expensive coffee beans from Brazil, silk aprons embroidered with my cafe's name, even a new espresso machine worth more than my monthly rent. Each item arrived with no return address, no note, but I could feel his presence in every detail, as though he were saying, "I see you. I know what you need before you ask." It was both a gift and a warning. By the end of the week, he started appearing in person. The first time he walked into my cafe, every head turned as if the air itself shifted. He wasn't just handsome. He was gravity in human form, and everything around him seemed to bend in quiet submission. He wore black again, always black, and his tie was loosened just enough to suggest both exhaustion and authority, that rare combination that makes women tremble without understanding why. He ordered an Americano. He sat by the window. He didn't speak to anyone else. But the way his eyes followed me as I moved behind the counter made my hands clumsy, my breath uneven, as though he could see straight through the layers I had built over 5 years of running and pretending. When I finally walked over with his drink, my heart was doing that uneven rhythm it always did when danger looked beautiful. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly, placing the cup in front of him. He looked up, his gaze unflinching. It's a public place. You know what I mean. He tilted his head, that faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Not cruel, not kind, just knowing. You said you wanted protection, Claudia. I'm simply making sure you have it. I didn't ask you to protect me, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl like dark glass. No, he said, almost to himself, but you called me anyway. And when you called, you tied yourself to me again. That's how this works. His calmness infuriated me. That unshakable composure, that quiet confidence that made everyone else look like they were speaking too loud, moving too fast. I wanted to scream at him, to throw the cup just to see if it would crack the mask he wore. But something in his eyes stopped me. There was warmth there, fleeting but real, like a fire glimpsed through smoke. Then Eli came running out from the back room, clutching his drawing of a dragon, and smiling wide when he saw the man sitting by the window. You came back, he said, voice full of that innocent excitement that broke me every time. Sion Jay's expression softened in a way I didn't know he was capable of. He crouched slightly to meet Eli's gaze, his voice low but gentle. Of course I did, he said. I said I would, didn't I? You're drinking coffee again? Eli said seriously. Mom says too much coffee makes you grumpy. That made him laugh. A real laugh this time, rich and deep, the kind that filled the space and made everyone turn to look. He glanced up at me, still smiling, and for a moment the world felt like it wasn't made of knives and secrets. I should have stopped it then. I should have told Eli the truth, should have drawn the line before the line disappeared. But watching them together, my son's easy trust, Sion Jay's quiet wonder, I felt the earth shift beneath me. Days turned into weeks, and Sion Jay kept coming back. Sometimes he stayed for hours, working from his phone, barely speaking, but always there, a shadow I couldn't escape. Sometimes he brought gifts for Eli, a book about airplanes, a small wooden puzzle, once even a miniature telescope that made my son's eyes glow with awe. He said it was for science, but I knew better. It was his way of planting himself deeper into our lives, one kindness at a time. I told myself it was temporary, that once Eli recovered fully, once the doctors declared him safe, Sion Jay would leave. But instead, his presence grew. The men in black suits became regulars outside my cafe. My landlord suddenly informed me my rent had been paid in full for the next year, though he wouldn't say by whom. And one morning, when I arrived to open the shop, I found the deed to the cafe sitting neatly in an envelope on the counter, signed and stamped. The buyer's name, Han Seon Jae. That was the day I snapped. I stormed into his car when he came by later, the scent of leather and smoke filling my lungs as I slammed the door. You bought my cafe? I demanded, voice trembling with anger. He didn't look surprised. You needed stability. I gave it to you. You gave me chains, I shouted. You think ownership is love? You think control is care? He turned then, eyes dark, voice low and calm, the kind of calm that's worse than shouting. I think safety has a price, and I pay it. Every time. I stared at him, trembling, because in that moment, beneath all the arrogance and power, I saw something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for the small boy sleeping under my roof. And that terrified me more than anything else, because it meant his feelings weren't simple, and neither were mine. When I finally stepped out of the car, the night air cold against my skin, he leaned closer through the open window and said something that would echo in my mind long after I was alone again. You can hate me all you want, Claudia, he said softly. But remember this. No one else will ever protect what's mine the way I do. Then he drove away, leaving the scent of danger behind him, heavy as smoke. That night I lay awake listening to the low purr of the black car outside, knowing that the devil had already crossed my threshold. Not with violence, not with threats, but with patience, persistence, and something far more dangerous than hatred. He wasn't breaking down my walls anymore. He was living inside them. I used to think that the scariest sound in the world was a gunshot, that sharp, brutal punctuation that turns life into aftermath. But I was wrong, because there are sounds far more terrifying than violence. There's the soft click of a lock turning on its own, the steady hum of an engine that never leaves your street, the silence before a child's laughter cuts off mid-sentence. Those are the sounds that keep you awake at night, the ones that tell you the beast has already entered your home, and you didn't even notice when it happened. It had been nearly a month since the hospital, a month since Seon-jae began orbiting our lives like a dark moon that refused to set. And though I wanted to believe I was getting used to it, the truth was that I'd simply stopped fighting what I couldn't change. Eli adored him. There was no other word for it. The first thing my son did every morning was rush to the window to see if Mr. J's car was outside. And when it was, he'd light up like sunrise, his tiny hands pressed against the glass, his voice bubbling with excitement as if he were waiting for Santa Claus instead of the man who once held a gun with the same ease that he now held my child's hand. I watched them together sometimes, secretly, from behind the cafe window, and what I saw confused me more than it frightened me. Seon-jae wasn't gentle in the way I understood the word, not soft or tentative, but there was a patience in him that I hadn't known existed, a carefulness that bordered on reverence whenever Eli was near. He never raised his voice, never let his temper bleed through, even when Eli asked the kind of questions only a child could ask. Why he never smiled in pictures, why his eyes looked sad when he thought no one was watching, why he always wore black. He'd answer, always with that measured calm. "Because black hides the stains," he'd say once, ruffling Eli's hair with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. And though Eli laughed, I felt my stomach twist because I knew what kind of stains he meant. The cafe had become a strange little world of contrasts, coffee and danger, laughter and shadows. My regulars had started whispering about the quiet men in suits who sat in the corner drinking espresso without ever ordering twice, about the sleek cars parked too long outside. I tried to pretend it didn't matter, that it was just temporary, but every day Seon-jae's world seeped deeper into mine, filling the cracks with something too heavy to scrape away. One evening, after closing, he came to help me lock up. It was late. The city lights outside painted the windows in shades of gold and gray. I was wiping down the counter when he said, almost casually, "You should hire another employee." I glanced up, surprised. "Why? You think I can't handle it?" He shrugged, leaning against the wall, the faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "I think you shouldn't be alone so late." "You mean you don't want me alone so late?" I corrected, my tone sharper than I intended. He didn't deny it. He rarely denied anything. "You're stubborn," he said softly, "and it's one of the things He paused, as if catching himself before crossing some invisible line. "One of the things that keeps you alive. But stubborn doesn't stop bullets." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so coldly sincere, sent a chill through me. I turned back to the counter, gripping the cloth too tightly. "Are you expecting bullets now?" He hesitated, then said, "I'm always expecting bullets." The honesty in his voice frightened me more than any threat could have. That night he drove me and Eli home again, though I didn't ask him to. It had become routine, his car a silent fortress gliding through the streets, while Eli dozed in the back seat and the city's neon lights flickered across Seon-jae's face, carving shadows into the sharp planes of his jaw. He looked almost peaceful then, almost human, until you saw the glint of awareness in his eyes that never left. the predator awake even when the man appeared calm. When we reached my building, he parked and turned toward me. "I'm having extra security installed tomorrow," he said. I frowned. "More?" "There's been movement," he explained, his gaze shifting toward the street as if seeing something I couldn't. "A rival family out of Busan. They've been watching me, and now they know about you. They'll see you as leverage." "Leverage," I repeated, the word tasting like metal. He looked back at me, his eyes dark and steady. "Don't look at me like that. I didn't bring this danger to your door. It found you the moment you gave birth to my son." I wanted to slap him, wanted to tell him that I never asked for this life, that I didn't want his money or his men or his protection. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Eli sleeping, his small face peaceful under the streetlight, the words died in my throat. The next morning, the city broke. It happened so fast I barely had time to register the sound before the shockwave hit. One second I was pouring coffee for an old couple who came in every morning, and the next there was a flash of white light and heat, the floor trembling, the windows shattering inward. I hit the ground, glass raining over me, the smell of smoke filling my lungs as screams tore through the air. For a moment I couldn't hear anything but the roar in my ears. I tasted blood, felt something warm trickle down my arm, and when I looked up through the haze, the front of my cafe was gone. The door, the windows, the awning, all twisted metal and broken glass. Someone grabbed me from behind, strong arms lifting me off the floor, pulling me toward the back. I didn't need to look to know who it was. "Claudia!" Sion J's voice was low but firm, cutting through the chaos like a command. "Where's Eli?" He's at school," I gasped, the words barely escaping through the shock. He exhaled sharply, relief flashing across his face before he turned toward the doorway, eyes scanning the street beyond the wreckage. His men were already there, shouting into radios, moving like a small army, their precision terrifyingly efficient. "Was this meant for you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He didn't look at me when he said, "No, it was meant for us." The world tilted then, the weight of those words pressing down until I could barely stand. Us. Not him. Us. The fire trucks came, the police asked questions, but Seonjae handled everything before I could even open my mouth. His men swept in like ghosts, cleaning, controlling, silencing. By the time the smoke cleared, the explosion was already being rewritten into something else. A gas leak, a tragic accident, a story that would vanish from the papers by morning. When it was over, when the cafe was nothing but ash and memory, he stood beside me, his expression unreadable. "I told you," he said quietly. "This is what happens when people realize you matter to me." "You call this protection?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "You bring war to my doorstep and call it love?" He turned to me then, and for a heartbeat I saw it. The mask slipping. The man beneath the monster, the ache he carried like a second skin. "I never said I loved you," he said softly. "But if I did, this is the only way I know how." He reached out, brushed a shard of glass from my hair, his fingers lingering for a moment too long. "Pack your things," he said finally, his tone shifting back to command. "You and Eli are coming with me. You'll stay at my penthouse until it's safe." "And if I refuse?" His gaze hardened. "Then I'll carry you out myself." I believed him. That night, as I stood in the ruins of everything I'd built, the city humming cold and uncaring beyond the police tape, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The danger wasn't just outside anymore. It wasn't the rival families, the explosions, the men in black. It was him. The man who would burn the world to keep me close. And part of me, God help me, was starting to wonder what it would feel like to burn with him. The first thing I noticed about Seonjae's penthouse was that it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum built by a man who didn't know what warmth was. A place so immaculate and precise that even the air seemed choreographed, every corner gleaming with the quiet perfection of money and discipline. It wasn't luxury that struck me, though there was plenty of that. The marble floors that reflected light like liquid. The towering glass walls that revealed the sole skyline like a living painting. The silent elevator that opened directly into his private domain. It was the absence of softness, the absence of any sign that a human heart had ever lived here. Eli was the only thing that broke that silence, his small voice echoing through the open space as he ran from room to room, marveling at everything, asking if we could stay forever. His laughter bouncing off the glass like sunlight trapped in a diamond. I wanted to tell him no, to remind him that this wasn't a sanctuary but a gilded cage, that the man who owned it could as easily destroy it as protect it. But the words died on my tongue because for the first time in days, my son looked safe, and I didn't have the cruelty to take that illusion from him. Sion J stood by the window as we entered, his back to us, the city lights outlining his figure in gold and shadow, his posture straight and unreadable. He had that stillness again, the kind that makes you forget to breathe until he moves. "This is temporary," he said finally, his voice calm, almost detached, as if reading my thoughts. "Until I find the one responsible for the explosion. You'll stay here with Eli. You'll have everything you need. No one will touch you." He turned then, and his gaze landed on me with the weight of something that wasn't quite control but wasn't freedom either. I wanted to challenge him, to tell him I didn't need his world or his protection, but standing there in that vast, silent room, surrounded by invisible guards and luxury that could swallow me whole, I realized something devastatingly simple. He wasn't asking. The next days blurred into a strange rhythm, a life that wasn't mine yet somehow began to feel like it. I woke up each morning to the scent of coffee already brewing, breakfast laid out by staff who smiled too politely, and Sion J already dressed in one of his endless black suits, phone in hand, eyes sharp with the weight of decisions I couldn't begin to understand. He would leave early, returning late, and the air would change the moment he stepped back into the penthouse, the temperature of the room shifting to match the gravity of his presence. Eli adored him more every day, following him around whenever he was home, asking him questions about everything, about Korea, about cars, about why the moon looks smaller in America. And to my surprise, Sion J always answered, patient and precise, his tone softening only for my son. It was like watching two worlds colliding, the innocence of childhood and the darkness of empire, and I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified that they were learning to coexist. One night, after Eli had gone to bed, I found Sion J in his office, sitting behind a desk made of black glass, surrounded by monitors displaying live feeds from cameras I didn't know existed. The city sprawled behind him through the window, glowing like embers. He looked up when I entered, his eyes unreadable, his posture too composed to be comfortable. "You have cameras in every corner of this building," I said quietly, my voice low but steady. "Even in the hallway outside my room." He didn't deny it. "Security," he said simply. "Control," I corrected. His lips curved into that faint, dangerous smile. The two often look the same. I walked closer, feeling the tension coil in the air between us like a living thing. "You think you can keep me safe by trapping me? You think walls and cameras will protect us from what you've built?" His gaze flicked toward me, sharp and measured, his jaw tightening. "You mistake me, Claudia," he said softly. "I don't build cages. I build fortresses." "Fortresses fall," I whispered. He stood then, the movement slow, deliberate, the distance between us vanishing until the only thing separating us was the faint shimmer of the city light. "Not mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not while I'm alive." Something in the way he said it, quiet, unshakable, with that bone-deep certainty, made me shiver. He reached out, fingers grazing my wrist, the touch light but electric. And for a moment the air seemed to thicken, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of his breath. "You're trembling," he murmured. "I'm angry," I said, though even to my own ears it sounded like a lie. His thumb brushed over the inside of my wrist, tracing the faint line of a vein. "You're not angry," he said softly. "You're afraid of what happens if you stop hating me." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to pull away, but I didn't. Because the truth was cruel. I was afraid, not of him, but of what he made me feel. Of how the air seemed to hum when he was near. How the walls of that golden prison began to feel like safety simply because he was inside them. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something darker. "You think I don't know what I've done to you? You think I don't see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching? I could end this, Claudia. I could send you away tomorrow, but you'd still wake up every night thinking about me." "Don't flatter. Yourself," I whispered, but the words didn't carry the bite I wanted. He smiled then, slow and dangerous. "It's not flattery, it's inevitability." The sound of Eli's door opening saved me from answering. We both froze as small footsteps padded down the hall. Eli appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, holding his stuffed rabbit. "Mommy," he said sleepily, "I had a bad dream." The moment shattered and I stepped back, my pulse still racing. I went to Eli, kneeling to hug him, but before I could speak, Sion J knelt too, his voice gentle in a way that caught me off guard. "It's all right, little one," he said, brushing Eli's hair back. "No bad dreams here. This place is safe. You're safe." Eli nodded, already half asleep against my shoulder, and I felt something twist deep in my chest, because the way Sion J looked at him then wasn't calculated, wasn't strategic. It was something raw, almost tender, like he'd just discovered a part of himself he didn't know existed. After I put Eli back to bed, I returned to find Sion J still standing by the window, his reflection overlapping with the city's lights. "I'm not your prisoner," I said softly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. He didn't turn. "No," he said quietly. "You're not. But you're mine now, whether you want to be or not. And that means I protect you, even from yourself." I wanted to hate him for saying it. But the truth was, the words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a vow. As the days passed, I began to notice the way the city looked different from his penthouse, as if we lived above consequence, as if the chaos below couldn't reach us. It was beautiful and terrible at once, this illusion of safety, this gilded world where danger wore a suit and love disguised itself as control. And yet, even as I told myself I was trapped, even as I whispered that this was a cage, a part of me, small, traitorous, alive, wondered if I had ever truly felt safer anywhere else. But safety in his world was never a promise. It was a prelude. Because one evening, as the sun melted behind the skyline, one of Sion J's men came rushing into the penthouse, whispering something in rapid Korean that made his face harden instantly. He looked at me then, eyes dark and cold. "Minna knows," he said, his voice like steel, "and she's coming." I didn't know who Minna was yet, but the way he said her name made my blood run cold. The night Minna came into our lives, the air in Sion J's penthouse felt heavier, thicker somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the storm that always comes when a secret stops being secret. I could feel it long before she arrived, the shift in his demeanor, the way he paced by the window with a restlessness that didn't belong to him, the sharpness in his voice when he answered his phone in Korean too quickly for me to follow. Even the men outside, the door stood straighter, their silence charged with the kind of alertness that always precedes disaster. He hadn't told me much about her, but I had pieced together enough over the weeks to understand who she was, or rather, what she was. Min-ah Kim, the only daughter of the Kim syndicate, Seoul's second-largest crime family and the Han's most convenient ally. Their marriage had been arranged years ago, sealed by contracts and politics, a truce masquerading as love. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was business, that men like Seon-jae didn't marry for affection but for strategy. And yet, when I looked at him that night, his jaw tight, his hands clenched behind his back, I realized something that made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to understand. This woman wasn't just a name on a document. She was the world he came from, the one I could never belong to no matter how many nights I slept under his roof. When the elevator chimed, the sound was so soft it almost felt polite. But the moment the doors slid open, the air shifted again, thick with perfume and power. She stepped out like someone stepping onto a stage. Tall, poised, every inch of her draped in elegance and quiet cruelty. Her hair was sleek and dark as ink, her lips painted the color of blood, her heels sharp enough to wound the floor. She didn't glance at the guards, didn't even acknowledge them, because people like her don't need to see those who serve them. Her eyes found Seon-jae immediately, and I saw it. The flicker of ownership, of something unspoken and practiced over years of being promised what she believed was hers. "Appa," she said softly, her Korean lilt smooth as silk, the word both affectionate and claiming. "You didn't tell me you had guests." Her gaze slid to me then, slow and deliberate, assessing every inch of me, from the coffee stains on my blouse to the small tremor in my hands. There was no kindness in that look, only curiosity sharpened into contempt. Seon-jae didn't move toward her. "Min-ah," he said quietly, his tone stripped of affection. "You shouldn't have come without calling." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that conceals teeth. "If I waited for you to answer my calls, I'd never see you again." Her eyes flicked to the hallway, where Eli's drawings were still taped to the wall, a messy collection of crayon rockets and stick figures. "I heard rumors," she continued, her voice tightening, "but I didn't believe them until now, so this is where you've been hiding." I felt my throat close, but before I could speak, Seon-jae stepped slightly in front of me. A small, almost imperceptible movement that told me he was already bracing for the inevitable. "Watch your tone," he said, the warning in his voice cutting clean through the air. Min-ah's laugh was soft, disbelieving. "You're protecting her?" she asked, her words drenched in mockery. "Her, of all people, a woman who doesn't even belong here? Do you think this will stay hidden? Do you think my father won't find out that you're keeping a mistress and a child in your tower like some secret fairy tale?" The word mistress hit me like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it wasn't entirely wrong. What was I, after all, if not the woman he sheltered in shadows? I wasn't his wife, wasn't his equal, wasn't even free. I was the complication he refused to discard, the sin he refused to confess. Seon-jae's voice dropped lower, quieter, more dangerous. "Be careful, Min-ah. You're speaking about the mother of my son." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Min-ah froze, her painted smile faltering as her gaze snapped toward me, then toward him. "You're—" "What?" she whispered, the disbelief twisting her features into something ugly. "You have a child with her." I wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble beneath my feet, but the silence that followed was suffocating. She looked at me like I was filth, like I was the reason the world she knew was crumbling. "So this is why you've been refusing the wedding meetings," she said, her voice breaking into something shrill and cold. "This is why your father's been furious. You let this woman ruin everything." Something in Seon-jae snapped then, something tightly wound and barely restrained. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his voice low but edged with ice. "Enough." But Min-ah wasn't afraid, and that was what made her dangerous. She reached out, grabbed his wrist, and said, You think you can throw away the alliance? You think love makes you untouchable? You forget who owns the leash around your neck." He didn't flinch, but his eyes went dead in a way that made the hair rise on my arms. "Take your hand off me," he said softly. When she didn't, he peeled her fingers away one by one with terrifying calm. "Leave before you make me forget you're a woman," he said. The silence that followed was electric, full of everything neither of them would say aloud. The threat, the history, the ruin waiting at the edge of every word. Minna's eyes flicked toward me once more, and this time, there was something almost pitying in them. "You think you've won," she said quietly, "but he'll never belong to you. He doesn't belong to anyone. You'll learn that soon enough." And then she left, the sharp rhythm of her heels echoing through the hallway until the elevator doors closed behind her, with a sound that felt final but wasn't. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Seon-jae stood by the window again, his reflection fractured by the glass. His hands braced against the frame as though holding himself upright took effort. "She'll tell them," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "She'll tell her family, your father, everyone. What happens then?" He didn't look at me. "Then I deal with it. You mean you'll start a war?" He turned then, his eyes meeting mine, dark and hollow. "If that's what it takes." I shook my head, the ache in my chest spreading until it filled me. "You can't fight the world for us." His expression softened, but not in comfort. It was sorrow disguised as certainty. "Claudia," he said, his voice rough, "I've been fighting the world my entire life. This time, at least, I know what I'm fighting for." I wanted to believe him, wanted to let that sentence wrap around me like a promise, but the truth sat between us like a wound that wouldn't close. "And what about Eli?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happens to him when your war starts?" He didn't answer, and maybe that was worse than any lie he could have told. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Minna's face, her smile sharp as glass, her words looping in my mind. He doesn't belong to anyone. Maybe she was right. Maybe Seon-jae was a man built for power, not love, a creature carved from violence who only knew how to claim, never to keep. And yet, when I looked at Eli sleeping peacefully between us, his small hand resting against his father's chest, I realized something even more dangerous than fear. Despite everything, despite logic, despite the danger that surrounded us, I didn't want to leave. Because the longer I stayed, the harder it became to remember who was saving who. When dawn crept through the glass, I found Seon-jae still awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone in his hand, his expression unreadable. I heard him whisper something in Korean, soft but deliberate. And though I didn't understand the words, I understood the tone. Final, commanding, absolute. When he hung up, he looked at me, his eyes darker than the night before. "I warned you," he said quietly. "Now the blood will come." There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Thin, merciless lines that you never see coming until you're standing on the wrong side of them, realizing that the world you knew has already burned to ash. For me, that line was drawn the morning Eli disappeared. It began as an ordinary day, or at least as ordinary as life could be in Seon-jae's penthouse, where silence hummed with the faint echo of guarded footsteps and safety was just another word for captivity. The city outside was waking slowly, fog rolling off the river, the sky still pale with sleep. Eli had eaten his breakfast at the kitchen island, humming to himself as he tried to balance a strawberry on his spoon, his laughter the only sound bright enough to make me forget where I was. Seon-jae had already left for a meeting, his absence like a weight pulled from the room, and I remember feeling almost light for the first time in weeks, almost free, almost foolish enough to think the storm had passed. It happened between breaths. One moment I was folding laundry, listening to the faint chatter of cartoons in the living room, and the next, the apartment was too quiet. That kind of silence doesn't come naturally. It creeps in like a warning, thick and wrong. I called his name once, then twice, the words catching in my throat. When he didn't answer, I ran. The living room was empty. The glass doors to the balcony stood open, the curtains billowing in the cold morning air. His toys were scattered across the floor, his rabbit, his crayons, but he was gone. The world narrowed to the sound of my heartbeat. I screamed his name, my voice cracking, raw, useless. I tore through every room, every hallway, every closet, as if he might be hiding, as if this was some cruel version of hide and seek. But deep down, I already knew. He wasn't here. He'd been taken. I don't remember how long I stood there, shaking, staring at the open balcony door. Time stopped meaning anything. When Seonjae finally came through that elevator, the look on my face must have told him everything, because he didn't ask a single question. "Where?" was all he said. I could barely speak, barely breathe. "He's gone," I whispered, my voice breaking on the word. "He was just here, and now—" His phone was already in his hand before I finished, his other hand gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He barked orders in Korean, words I couldn't understand but whose meaning I felt in the air. Rage, fear, war. The calm, composed man I'd known, the one who could charm or command with a single glance, vanished in an instant. What replaced him was something darker, primal, something that made the room feel smaller just by existing. He didn't speak to me for a long time after that. He just stood there, pacing like a caged animal, the phone pressed to his ear, his jaw tight, his breathing controlled but ragged beneath the surface. Every second that passed made the silence heavier. Finally, one of his men appeared at the door, panting, pale, blood already splattered on his sleeve. He bowed his head and said something that made Seonjae's expression go still. Not shocked, not angry, just still, like he'd expected it all along. "Minna," he said quietly, almost gently, as if the name itself required care not to break. My stomach dropped. She took him? He looked at me then, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was no mask, no control, just something raw and deadly beneath his eyes. "She wanted to hurt me," he said softly, "and she knew exactly where to strike." The next hours passed in fragments, flashes of motion and noise that barely registered as real. Seonjae's men flooded the penthouse, radios crackling, orders flying, the hum of engines below as cars were mobilized. I stood in the middle of it all, frozen, watching the machine of his empire awaken around me, efficient, merciless, absolute. It was like seeing the underworld rise from beneath the surface, no longer hidden, no longer restrained. When he finally turned back to me, his face was carved from ice. "You're staying here," he said. "The hell I am!" I snapped, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "He's my son. I'm coming." His eyes met mine, hard and unyielding. "Claudia, this isn't a rescue mission. It's a blood hunt. You don't want to see what I'll become." "I don't care," I said, stepping closer, the trembling in my hands betraying me. "He's our son. I'm not sitting here while you—" He caught my face in his hands then, not roughly, but with a kind of desperate force, as if he was trying to anchor both of us. "You think you know what I am," he said, voice low and shaking, "but you don't. You've seen the man. You've never seen the monster. And once you do, you won't be able to love either." I wanted to tell him I already had, that love and fear were the same thing when it came to him. But the words wouldn't come. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Hours crawled by. I couldn't sit still. Every sound from the street below made me flinch. Every car horn felt like an omen. The television played on mute, showing news that didn't matter. voices that didn't reach me. My world had shrunk to the space between one breath and the next, between hope and despair. It was past midnight when he returned. I heard him before I saw him. The low, deliberate footsteps, the quiet murmur of men outside, the faint smell of smoke and blood trailing behind him. When he stepped into the room, I didn't recognize him. His suit was torn, his hands stained dark, his eyes flat and empty. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "He's safe," he said finally, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. My knees gave out before I reached him. I covered my mouth, a sob clawing its way out as relief and terror collided inside me. Where is he?" "Sleeping," he said. "He's in the car downstairs. He didn't see anything." I wanted to believe him, wanted to collapse in his arms and let the weight of it all wash away. But something in his voice made me pause. I looked closer, and that's when I saw it. The faint splatter of blood on his collar, the cut on his knuckle, the slight tremor in his fingers that betrayed the violence he'd just unleashed. "What did you do?" I whispered. He exhaled, closing his eyes. "What I had to." The room tilted around me. "You killed her." He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The silence was confirmation enough. "Seon-jae." "She threatened my son," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "She took him from you, from me. There was no mercy left to give." I wanted to hate him, to scream at him, to make him understand that this wasn't justice, it was destruction. But when he looked at me, eyes hollow and human all, at once I realized he already knew. He'd destroyed something inside himself tonight, something that could never be rebuilt. I sank onto the floor, covering my face, the tears coming hot and fast. "He'll grow up knowing what you've done," I said through the sobs. "You can't protect him from what you are." He knelt beside me, his hand hesitating before resting on my shoulder, the faint tremor still there. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I can make sure no one else ever hurts him again, not while I'm still breathing." And then, as if on cue, his phone buzzed, a single vibration that cut through the stillness. He glanced at it, and I saw the flicker of something dark across his face. "They're coming for me next," he said simply. "The Alliance won't let this go." My blood went cold. So what happens now? He stood, straightening his jacket, his movements calm again, controlled. "Now," he said, "we stop running." He turned toward the window, looking out over the city, his reflection fragmented by glass and neon. The skyline burned faintly red in the distance, a smear of light like a wound. That night, as he stood there, his silhouette carved against the city he ruled and bled for, I finally understood what it meant to love a man like him. Not the thrill, not the danger, but the inevitability of it. Love, in his world, was never about holding, it was about surviving the ruin. And as I looked at him, this man who had just bathed the streets in blood for our child, I realized I no longer knew if I was terrified of him, or terrified of the part of me that no longer wanted to leave. The night after Minna's death, the world went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what Seon-jae would do next, waiting for the aftershocks of violence to ripple through the streets he owned like veins beneath skin. The news didn't say her name, of course, it never would, but I could see it in the spaces between the headlines, the whispers in the corridors of power, the sudden absence of cars outside the building that used to follow us wherever we went. Something had shifted, something irreversible. The balance of power was broken, and in its place stood a silence too heavy to be peace. I barely spoke for days. I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw the blood that didn't wash off, the faint tremor in his hand when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his voice had changed, lower, slower, as though every word carried the weight of a secret he couldn't set down. He didn't try to explain what had happened. He didn't justify or deny it. He just existed beside me like a storm that had already done its damage, waiting for me to decide whether I'd rebuild or walk away from the wreckage. Eli didn't know. He smiled as he always did, asked when Daddy would take him to see the stars again, showed me the drawings he made of the three of us standing under a sky full of impossible constellations. I wanted to protect that innocence, to keep him floating in the fragile bubble of childhood that the world was so eager to burst. But every time he called Seonjae Dad, the word felt like both salvation and betrayal. That night, the air in the penthouse was suffocating, thick with smoke and the faint metallic scent of rain about to fall. Seonjae was in his office again, sitting behind that massive black desk, the only light coming from the window where the city burned quietly beneath him. I watched him from the doorway for a long time before I found the courage to speak. "You can't fix this," I said finally, my voice soft but steady. "You think you can clean it up, cover it, make it disappear, but blood doesn't vanish just because you own the ground it falls on." He didn't look up at first, just let out a long, tired breath, the kind that sounds like surrender dressed up as control. "I don't need to fix it," he said quietly. "I just need to make sure it never happens again." "You mean kill again?" I said, and though my tone was calm, the words landed like stones. He finally looked at me then, his gaze dark and sharp, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "You say that like you don't understand why I did it." "I understand," I said, my throat tight. "I just don't know if I can live with it." He stood slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor, and crossed the space between us with that predatory grace that always made my breath catch. Not because I feared him, but because I feared how much I didn't. When he stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the heat of him, I realized I'd been holding my breath. "You think love is supposed to be gentle?" he said, voice low and unsteady. "But in my world, it's war. It's choosing someone and bleeding for them until there's nothing left." "That's all I know, Claudia. That's all I've ever known." "Then you don't know love," I whispered, though my voice trembled. His eyes softened, and in that softness was something that broke me more than his anger ever could. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I know what it means to never let go." He reached for me then, his hand brushing the side of my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It wasn't a tender touch. It was desperate, as if he were memorizing me before the world could take me away. "You don't see it yet," he said, his voice a whisper now, raw and rough. "But everything I've done, the blood, the lies, the war, it was all leading here. To you. To this." My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. "To what?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He stepped back just far enough to reach into his pocket. When he pulled his hand out, there was a ring between his fingers. Not the kind you find in jewelry stores, not something delicate or romantic. It was heavy, old, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It looked more like a weapon than a promise. "Marry me," he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thick, beautiful, suffocating. I stared at him, unable to breathe. "You can't be serious." He didn't flinch. "I've never been more serious in my life." "After everything?" I said, my voice rising. "After the blood, the lies, the danger? You think a ring makes this right?" He took a step closer, his voice tightening. "No. I think it makes it permanent." The room felt smaller with every breath, the walls closing in as if the air itself wanted an answer. "You don't want a wife," I said, shaking my head. "You want control. You want to make sure I never leave." His jaw clenched, but there was pain in his eyes when he said, "You already belong to me, Claudia. This just makes it real." I laughed then, but it wasn't amusement. It was hysteria breaking through exhaustion. You don't own me, Seonjae. He caught my wrist, not roughly, but with enough force to make me meet his eyes. No, he said softly, but I'd die before I let anyone else have you. There it was, the truth, naked and unvarnished. It wasn't love he offered me, not in the way I'd once believed love to be. It was obsession, devotion twisted into something feral, something that didn't know how to stop. Do you even hear yourself? I whispered. Yes, he said simply. And if I scare you, then at least you know what I am. I'd rather you fear me for the truth than love me for a lie. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The city hummed below, distant sirens wailing like ghosts, and I realized how tired we both looked, how broken. Maybe this was what love was in his world. Not redemption, but survival. I took the ring from his hand, feeling the weight of it against my palm, the metal cold and heavy like fate itself. If I say yes, I said slowly, what happens then? He smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. Then no one will ever touch you again, not your past, not my enemies, not even me unless you ask. I wanted to believe him, wanted to step into that promise even knowing it was a lie. Because part of me, the part that had been starved for safety, for belonging, wanted to believe that the devil could love. But before I could answer, before I could find the courage to speak, the sound shattered the moment. A crash. Glass exploding somewhere down the hall. Then shouting, distant but growing louder, urgent, violent. Seonjae's hand was on his gun before I even understood what was happening. Stay here, he said, his voice suddenly hard again, command replacing confession. Seonjae, stay with Eli, he snapped, the softness gone, the man I loved replaced by the killer the world feared. He was gone before I could stop him, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, swallowed by chaos. I ran to Eli's room, heart hammering, the world outside erupting in noise, gunfire, shouting, the sound of something breaking, something ending. I locked the door, pulled my son close, pressed my ear against the wood, and then, over the sound of everything, over the screams, the glass, the gunfire, I heard it. A single gunshot. Then silence. There are moments when silence becomes the loudest thing in the world, when it fills every corner of you until you can no longer tell if the sound you hear is from the world outside or the breaking inside your own chest. That was the silence that followed the gunshot, the kind that stretched time into something infinite and cruel, the kind that steals the air from your lungs and replaces it with dread. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there on the floor of Eli's room, my arms wrapped around him so tightly he could barely breathe, my body shaking as if the tremor could somehow keep reality from finding us. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Final. The door opened before I could reach it, and there he was. Seonjae, standing in the threshold, the light from the hallway painting him in fractured gold and shadow. His shirt was torn, blood splattered across the white cotton, his gun hanging loosely at his side. For one wild, irrational heartbeat, I thought the blood was his. But then he looked at me, his eyes clear, sharp, alive, and I knew it wasn't. It's over, he said quietly. 2 words, simple and calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I wanted to ask what over meant, wanted to know who had fallen, who still breathed, but the answers were already in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Somewhere down that hallway, another life had ended, another enemy silenced, and maybe another piece of him gone with it. I stood slowly, every muscle trembling, Eli still clinging to me, his small voice muffled against my neck. "Mommy, what happened?" he whispered, and I wanted to tell him it was nothing, that the world was safe again, that monsters didn't live this close. But the lie caught in my throat. "Go to your room, sweetheart," I said softly, brushing his hair back, forcing my voice steady. Lock the door and wait for me. He looked up at Sion J once, uncertain, then nodded and ran down the hall, his bare feet pattering against marble, leaving the two of us alone. When the door closed behind him, I finally looked at Sion J. Really looked. There was blood on his hands, a smear across his cheek, and exhaustion etched deep into his face. But beneath it all was something else. Something that looked almost like peace. "Who was it?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. He hesitated, then said, "One of Minna's men." He broke through the lower entrance. "It's done." "Done?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You say that like it means anything, like it ends here." He exhaled, his shoulders sinking. "It ends if I say it ends." I wanted to laugh at that, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. "You can't keep saying that. You can't keep pretending that violence obeys you just because you command it." He walked closer, slow and deliberate, every movement a careful study and restraint. "What do you want me to say, Claudia? That I regret it? That I wish I could undo everything I've done? You and I both know there's no version of me that could have given you the quiet life you wanted." "I never asked for quiet," I said, my voice shaking. "I asked for truth." He stopped then, inches from me, his breath shallow, his eyes dark. "The truth is this," he said softly. "I was born to destroy, but somehow, when you walked back into my life, I wanted to learn how to build instead. And I failed. I always fail. But I tried." The honesty in his voice gutted me. Because it was true, he had tried, in the only way he knew how. His love wasn't flowers and promises. It was blood and protection. It was brutal, flawed, consuming. It was survival disguised as devotion. I reached up without thinking, my hand brushing the side of his face, my fingers coming away streaked with blood that wasn't his but still felt like ours. "You can't build a future on bodies," I whispered. "Not even for love." He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch for just a moment before pulling away, the distance between us heavy with everything we couldn't fix. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly, "but I can build one on fear. And that's enough to keep you both alive." "Alive?" I repeated, the word fragile on my tongue. "But at what cost?" He didn't answer. He just turned toward the window, the city lights flickering against the glass, painting him in that same cruel glow that made him look both untouchable and unbearably human. The skyline stretched before us, vast and indifferent, 1,000 stories of power and sin, and I wondered how many people had died just to keep this view safe. "Come away with me," he said suddenly, his voice low but certain. "Leave the city. Leave everything. I have places, safe houses, islands, names no one knows. We could disappear, you, me, Eli. We could start over." For a second, I almost said yes. For a second, I imagined it. White beaches, no guns, no shadows, just the three of us in a world untouched by the past. But the image shattered as quickly as it came, because men like him don't get to start over, and women like me don't get to pretend they can save them. "I can't," I said softly. He turned then, his expression breaking, just barely. "You mean you won't?" "No," I whispered, feeling the tears rise. "I mean, I can't keep loving someone who doesn't know how to stop fighting. You said love is war, but I can't raise my son in a battlefield." He stepped closer again, his voice almost desperate now. "I can change." "No," I said, shaking my head, tears finally spilling. "You can't. And I don't even want you to. Because that man, the one who would try to change, wouldn't be you. You'd hate yourself for it." For a long moment, there was only silence between us, the kind that feels like goodbye. He nodded once, slow and solemn, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady again, though I could hear it breaking beneath the surface. "Then take him," he said. "Take Eli. I'll make sure you have everything you need, a new name, a new country. They won't find you." "And you?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurts to see. "I'll stay where I belong, among ghosts." I wanted to tell him not to, wanted to reach for him and erase the distance, but something in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was giving it. That night, as the city slept, I packed what little I owned. The ring he had given me lay on the counter, gleaming faintly under the kitchen light, a circle of gold that had never meant forever, only possession. I left it there. When dawn came, pale and merciless, I carried Eli in my arms through the empty hallways. Sion J was standing by the window again, watching the sunrise over Seoul. He didn't turn as I approached, didn't say a word. I hesitated, my heart clawing at my ribs, then whispered, "Goodbye." He closed his eyes, and I saw the faintest movement in his jaw before he whispered, almost to himself, "It was never goodbye, just distance." And then I left. The city was waking when I stepped outside, sirens echoing in the distance, the air thick with the scent of rain and smoke. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Some loves aren't meant to be lived, they're meant to be survived. Years from now, maybe I'll tell Eli the truth. Maybe I'll tell him that his father wasn't a hero or a monster, but something in between. A man who tried to build heaven out of hell and failed, but loved us fiercely enough to burn for it. Maybe he'll understand that love, in the end, isn't about who saves who. It's about who learns to let go. And as the plane took off that morning, the city shrinking into memory below me, I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered to the sky, "Sometimes the only way to love the dark is to walk out of it."